Hi, my name is Dale Mazzarella. I'm a Fly Fishers International Master Casting Instructor, a longtime Wyoming fishing guide, and an award-winning coach and educator. I've put together this video series that I hope will help you become a better fisherman, catch a lot more fish, and I hope you enjoy it. So enjoy yourself, have a good time, and let me know what you think. Let's talk about wading flats and keeping it simple. I wade a lot of flats when I'm here in Tampa, and I think it's you don't need a boat. It's really easy. It takes very little equipment, hardly anything to do it. It's cheap, quick, fast, just an awesome. I love doing it. But there's a couple of things. First off, let's talk about safety. You get out on those flats. First off, keep track of the tides. There's a flat here that's got a sandbar about a quarter mile off, and it's about almost 1.5 feet less deep than the water to get to it. So one day, years ago when I first started, hey, I get out there, I can see the sandbar. It's exposed. So I walk through, water up to my knees to get to this sandbar, and I'm fishing away and I'm not really paying attention, and pretty soon the water's up to halfway up to my thighs, and I realize, oh man, I got to go back, and now it's over my waders, and I got to get all the way back to shore. I got to walk through 1/2 mile of water above my waders, which was not particularly comfortable. So keep your eye on the tides. The next thing you should do is think about mud. Boy, there's some places where you step in that mud and you stand there very long, it's hard to move your feet. And then you can get stuck. I mean, I don't know, I guess you can just, get below the surface and push and yank, but you're gonna get wet getting out. Oysters, be careful of oysters. Where we are, there's some oyster beds that you got to be kind of careful of because they're sharp, they're jagged, they're undulated, so it's not like you're walking on just one flat surface. And they can cut boots, they can cut ankles, and you've got all kinds of infections. In our water, as the water gets warmer in Tampa Bay, there are bacteria in there that are flesh-eating kinds of bacteria. So I tend to wear waders, and I stay away from walking over oysters for that reason. Then you've got creatures, you got sharks, you got rays. I got stung by a stingray 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm telling you, you do not want to be stung by a stingray. Be aware of them, shuffle your feet, do all that kind of stuff. And then of course, other than creatures like sharks and stingrays and jellyfish, always keep your eyes open for that kind of stuff. And I don't wade generally past my mid-thigh, because A, I can't see anything anyway, B, it's hard to cast because you're so far down in the water, it's tough to make any kind of a long cast, and C, I just don't like what might be swimming around down there, but I was not born near an ocean, I'm just kind of a chicken. So, got to do what you got to do. In any case, and the last one is lightning. And on this phone, I've got a bunch of apps, and one of the apps that I have is called My Radar, and you won't be able to see it very clearly from there, but My Radar, I can zoom in on a particular place, like right now. If I zoom in here, I can tell, and you can zoom it in so it's right next to you. Any of those red places, if that's red, man, you better start getting out of the water, because some of our flats are 1/2 mile from shore. So you're gonna wade through thigh-deep water 1/2 mile while lightning's flashing around you. It's a pretty scary experience. So I carry this. I also carry a tide chart. I carry a wind chart, a tide chart, and a weather chart. So those are the 3 things that I carry on my phone so I can make sure I see them, and there's tons of different apps that are available that are free. So let's talk about, once we've kind of considered the safety aspects, let's talk about the conditions that we want to be aware of. Once you get to know a flat, and I've been doing this for a number of years, but there's some people at the local fly club who have been doing it for 35 years, a lot more days than me, and it always blows me away how well they know their flats. They know when at a certain tide and a certain wind direction and a certain water temperature, they're going to be able to find fish on flat A, but not on flat B, on flat C, but not A. So, understanding tides, wind direction, water temperatures, all that kind of stuff, how sunny is the sky. Oftentimes when I wade, I want to have a fairly low incoming tide. I want blue sunny sky so I can see fish. I want to have water that's only knee deep. Wind, I don't really care about that much. A little chop isn't going to bother me in the water. But the other thing is the season. Here in Tampa Bay anyway, you're not going to get in January, February, you're not going to be a lot of fish eating bait fish because there aren't any bait fish. It's mostly crabs and shrimp, little crustaceans that are on the bottom that these fish are looking for. So you need to be aware of what flies to carry, which we're going to talk about in just a second. So make sure that all that stuff you can compensate for. And my suggestion would be, for instance, in Tampa Bay, we got two really good fly shops that those guys know their stuff. They've been out fishing a ton. You go in there and you ask them, they'll tell you what kind of flies to use. They'll tell you what tides to fish, what flats to fish, and then of course join your local fly club if you're a local. If you're just visiting for a couple of days, then still go find a fly club, make a phone call, and get some information before you go walking out there. Before we get to flies, let's just talk about a couple of skills that are useful. The first one is just know a couple of knots. You need to be able to tie some flies on. You need to be able to change leader links, tippet links when you're out there. So knowing a blood knot or a surgeon's knot and a couple of knots, a non-slip loop knot, to be able to tie your flies onto your tippet would be helpful, so you can do it in the middle of when you're fishing, because you're going to be cutting off flies some days. The other thing is casting. You may make casts. I mean, you see a redfish, it might be 10 feet from you, and all of a sudden you got to flip your line 10 feet away. It could be 55 feet from you. It can be moving barely, just kind of nosing around, tailing. It can be cruising. So all those skills, quick casting skills, short tip casts, all those skills are really very helpful when you get out on those flats. So practice your casting. Practice casting in different directions. Practice casting with the wind and coming in different places. Practice casting long, short, fast, slow, all kinds of different casts. And then practice so you're not waving your rod around. The fewer false casts you make, the better off you're going to be on flats. People who sit out there and make 10 false casts, there's a lot of gleaming reflections off of a rod and even a line and even a fly sometimes. So be careful about that kind of stuff. I fished with these big copper flies, the copper tinsel flies they use in some places, near Orleans and in the Gulf of Mexico. Man, I tell you, those things get in the sun and they glint. It's like a big giant beacon going over a fish's head. So be careful of that. And the last one is wading. I think it's an underappreciated skill when you're wade fishing. When you're wade fishing, you got to be quiet. If you're pushing through the water and shoving a big bunch of wakes in front of you, those fish feel that with their lateral line. And I know in Tampa Bay, they're pretty spooky here because they're so heavily fished and we have so many people fishing for them that you've got to be pretty stealthy. It's a lot like sneaking up to a trout. 1 foot at a time, slowly. Try not to smash stuff that makes noise on the bottom. Try not to push water. Just be really stealthy when you're wading. So wading can be a big thing. So now let's talk about flies. It's kind of funny. Flies are an interesting phenomena that I always get a kick out of. I used to help a guy in Wyoming. He would go off moose hunting and I would always run his fly shop for him for a couple of weeks. And I'll never forget one day in particular, there's a little place called the Narrows on the local river. And so this guy had come in about 9 o'clock in the morning and said, man, I got to have a number 12 yellow Sally. It's the only thing that's working. Do you have any? I said, oh yeah, sure. So I'd go over to the bin, pick out 10 little yellow Sallies. This guy'd take them. The next guy shows up and he goes, hey man, it's only a size 14. He's fishing the same place. He's fishing the Narrows, which is only 2 miles long. He's fishing the Narrows. He says, the only fly that's going to work is a size 14 tan El Caricatus. Do you have any? I go, sure. So here comes another guy about an hour and a half later. It's 11 o'clock and the guy says, man, I've been fishing with a Royal Wolf size 16 and man, that's the only fly that's going to work. I go, okay, fine. So we walk over to the bin, we get him a bunch of flies size 16. The truth is, on that particular day, whatever fly you're going to use is probably going to work. And that was on a trout stream. My experience has been in saltwater. They're a lot less selective in saltwater as a rule than they are in freshwater. So just about if it's crab time and it's a you know, a crab that big that's kind of a olivey brown, there's a whole lot of patterns that would probably work in that circumstance. It's probably going to be your delivery and how you present the fly and what do you do with it once it lands. You know, how do you move the fly? That's going to be a lot more important than the fact that it's the fly. So I'm not a big believer in having to carry a huge amount of patterns out into saltwater. For the most part, if you can't catch them on one or two different crab patterns of different sizes and colors, and one or two different shrimp patterns of different sizes and colors, and a couple of different bait patterns of different sizes and colors, the odds are pretty good you're not catching them. They're just not eating that day, or you've got a problem with your presentation. Either your casting is flawed, you're not putting the fly in the right place, or you're not retrieving the fly correctly. Because those issues are way more important, especially in saltwater, than the fly that you use. So let's take a look at the flies that I have in my boxes, and I've got two boxes. One, I carry just a couple of dark flies that are sort of generic, you know, just big, dark, bushy flies, and I tend to enjoy and like a lot of flies that have more movement to them. They're more impressionistic flies than realistic flies. I think the movement of a fly, the fact that it looks alive, is more important, especially in saltwater. I also, you probably can't see it from here, but I tie a lot of my flies with a weed guard on them because I throw them into mangroves and over oyster bars. And I want to be able to preserve my fly and not have to go grab it. So I tie a couple of those. Then what I have is I've cut a couple of big old, this is a favorite pattern of mine. It's got a huge head on it. It pushes a huge amount of water. It wiggles really good. And it's got a spun deer head hair that's been trimmed. So I have a couple of those in different colors, gray, brown, tan, and white. And then I've got some normal, these are normal patterns that are bait fish patterns. You know, just a normal old typical bait fish pattern. And I have quite a few of those in my box, mostly olive and white, but I've got a few that are other colors. And then I've got some poppers and gurglers. So you always carry poppers and gurglers because you never know when you might be able to get some surface action early in the morning here. We can get surface hits on snook, especially in trout. Our redfish don't hit gurglers and poppers real often, but the snook and the trout certainly do. So I always carry a couple of those in a few different sizes and colors. And then I've got some bait fish patterns that are smaller, more realistic patterns that are just mostly the smaller stuff. I use this a lot in the spring when the bait fish tend to be smaller. And so I've got quite a few of those little patterns. So that's one box, mostly with bait fish kinds of patterns. And then in the other box, I've got mostly crabs and shrimp and a couple other, for instance, I always carry a bunch of glass minnows, and I use DNA material with my glass minnows. Some are heavy, some are light, some are bead chain eyes, some are lead eyes, and they come anywhere from dark to light. This one here is particularly good depending on the time of the year. But anyway, these are smaller flies. They're most like our glass minnows that are just hatching, especially in the spring. You'll find a lot of even bigger fish eating glass minnows. This is just another bait fish pattern that I use quite frequently. It's got raccoon fur in the back and a couple of hackles just to give it some motion. And I really believe in big eyes on a lot of my patterns. Then I use, this is typical, I hardly ever use these, but I do occasionally. Just silver or gold spoons. And then I've got a bunch of these things here are just crab patterns. And you can see most of my crab patterns are brown to olive. And basically the way I tie them again, I tie pretty big claws on them that are made out of this just hackle material. And then I use fox, you know, rabbit, squirrel, different kinds of things for the hackle around the hook shank. And then I've got some shrimp patterns, and again, these are just ones I happen to have right now. They're just tannish shrimp patterns, again, raccoon fur, and just this is more or less just a tan clouser, but it's made a lot fatter. So that's about it. This is all I have. So I take off. These are the only two fly boxes that I use when I'm fishing. So I have that. I pretty much believe if I can't catch a fish on these flies, it's not going to happen. Oftentimes I'll even go with just one of these boxes. In the winter, oftentimes I won't even take this box with me. That's why I have two. In the winter, the only bait fish patterns I'm going to use are smaller ones like the Clousers. And then the rest of it's all shrimp and crabs. So now we're getting into March. When I'm making this, I'll start bringing my bigger box. But January and February, it's just going to be one box. So the only thing I really carry with me is my little chest pack. And I've seen a lot of people that I know just have a little butt pack, a little fanny pack. It's all you need. So this is all I have with me other than my rod and my reel and sometimes a stripping basket. Really, that's just about it. So I may carry an extra if I want to, or I might think I might need it. We'll talk about that in a little while. I may carry an extra reel, but this is primarily what I have. So I wear a nice shirt with two big pockets in it in case I want to carry an extra fly box, and then I have a camera with a phone on it, or a phone with a camera on it. And then in here, all I have is one fly box that we just talked about for the winter, for instance. There's my one fly box for the winter. And then I just have a little stuff here. I put my flies on there, and if as soon as they get wet, well, I tell you, the second I get home, I take them out, rinse them in good cold water, and put them back after they dried. Then in this pocket, all I've got is in one pocket here, I've got my tippets. So I use fluorocarbon tippet for the most part when I'm fishing the flats. And I've got 8-pound, 12-pound, 16-pound, and 20-pound tippet, which pretty much covers all of the fish that I might encounter. If I think I might get into some bigger snook, I might bring 30 or 40-pound fluorocarbon just because of it doesn't fray as easy when the snook runs and it gets its scale on the side of that. It can break it off. But this is pretty much all I need in terms of tippets. So I bring those tippets, and you may not even need to bring the 20-pound, although you can start rebuilding a little leader if you cut it back too far. Then I bring a leader, and I have a file to file my hooks. That's super important. You're going to catch more fish if you're filing your hooks, I think, for sure. Also down in that little pocket, I've got a thermometer, because if I get out there and I know that yesterday or last week I got out there and the water temperature was 68 and today it's 61, you know, I might as well just pack up and go back home again. And also there's some apps that'll tell you what the water temperature is, but I carry a thermometer. The other thing I carry is just a little pocket knife with some scissors and a couple of knives on it, and of course a nail knot tool in case I have to put on another leader for whatever reason. So that's all there is in that pocket. And then what I have on the outside, I have a fish hook remover that I find pretty easy to do if I've got fish that I don't want to get near them. Every once in a while we've got a catfish, puffer fish, some other stuff that I don't want to be near their dorsal fins. So I use this. I've also got a pair of pliers for removing hooks, smashing hook barbs, whatever. You never can have a pair of pliers that this is always something you want to have. And the last thing I have is some clippers. So I have a big pair of clippers that I can file to keep them sharp without having to buy new clippers or screw around with sending in blades again. In any case, that's it. That's all I have. That is all my stuff that I take. And so that's it. What you see right here, I'll move this over so you can kind of see it better, minus the coffee cup of course. That's it. That's what I take with me fishing. And other than that, I'm free, and it's pretty nice. Get home, just rinse it all really good, and have some fun. So let's talk about the big stuff that you need to have. I usually bring a 7 or an 8 weight rod, but that's perfectly negotiable. You could even bring a 6 weight. Sometimes I might even bring a 6 weight, but normally it's a 7 weight and sometimes an 8 if I'm thinking I'm going to cast bigger flies, longer distances, and there's wind. The other thing I usually have with me, at least in a car, is a sink tip, intermediate sink tip line that I can get if I'm going to have to throw into a deeper trough or a drop off and I want to get my fly a little bit lower, or if I want to fish a flat where I'm fishing bait fish in 2 or 3 feet of water and I want to maintain a flat trajectory on that bait fish instead of having it dip up and down like it will if it's on a sinking or floating line. If I have a intermediate line, it'll just keep that fly moving a little bit more normally. So I might have those 2 fly lines. The other thing that I'll probably bring is usually I'm bringing a stripping basket, and it's certainly not a necessity. I know a lot of people that don't. I just find a stripping basket is so much easier rather than having to worry about carrying loops, worrying about the line dragging behind you, worrying about, how you hold the loops. I can do that, and I've got a video on how to do that. And certainly if I've forgotten my strip basket or the person I'm going to go fishing with doesn't have one and are having trouble, I can fish without one, but I just think it's easier, and if you get used to it, it's pretty simple to use. So a stripping basket can be good. I like to wear a shirt with some pockets in it so I can stick extra fly boxes, my phone, something like that in my pocket so I don't have to carry anything more than my pack with me. Hat, I like a big broad brim hat with a black bottom on it. It's amazing how much the inside of the brim, this hat here for instance, the inside of that brim is black. And I'm telling you, that black hat makes a huge difference in terms of the glare, because it absorbs the light instead of bouncing the light off onto your face. So try that. I wear good sunglasses, always have good sunglasses, have good, usually I'll wear a belt so I can put my pliers on the belt if I want to. The thing I do a lot here in Tampa Bay is I wear waders, just because I've heard some horror stories about infections people get from little cuts on their bodies. So again, that depends on where you're going. I certainly would rather wade wet, but the older I get, the less often I'm wading wet and the more often I'm wearing waders, just because of other considerations like scratches and cuts and that kind of thing. So those are basically what I'm going to wear. Boots, if I'm wading in the flats, a lot of people wear neoprene boots. When I got whacked by that stingray, I was wearing neoprene boots, and the tail went through the neoprene boot on the top, and I was shuffling, but it was in a muddy area. I really couldn't see the bottom. I was shuffling, and I guess there was tons and tons of these rays. They weren't very big. They were about this big. But he went through the top of my neoprene boot, went into the top of my foot, and of course he couldn't get his barbs out because the neoprene had trapped the barbs. So he just sat there and wiggled around, flopping against my leg while his tail drilled holes into his spines into my top of my foot. So for now I wear a much harder top on my boots. That I don't wear neoprene boots anymore unless the water's super clear and I can see really well. But a lot of our water, we're walking through kinds of mud, or we've got a lot of fish that are disturbing it. You got mullet that are swimming around, schools of hundreds of mullet, your water's going to be kind of dirty. So I'm wearing boots from now on, and mostly waders, but that certainly is something you can consider as an option. One last thing I found for the sun, because obviously sunscreen is going to be really important, and if you're near mangroves, you may want to consider insect repellent, because if the wind's blowing from you into the mangroves, you can get no-see-ums and mosquitoes and all kinds of stuff to come out and bite you. I have a balaclava system that I use when the wind's blowing really bad. If the wind's not blowing bad, I just wear my big broad-brimmed hat because I think it protects the back of my neck and my eyes better, and it's more comfortable than having to wear this. But this is a balaclava, which I oftentimes wear, and the reason I wear it is because it keeps my hat on in a bad wind and it still protects my face. So this is the kind of thing I use. You just put it over the top of you, and now it's going to keep your hat from blowing off, especially like if you're in a flats boat and you're flying across the flats. This is going to keep it off, and man, there's no sun exposure to your skin. So this is something I use quite a bit when I'm wade fishing. I don't like them when it's super hot, but it's better than getting burned, and it's certainly better than having my hat blow off all the time. So you might consider a balaclava like this. So in conclusion, I would just say that, what I've demonstrated and explained is for my particular kinds of fishing here, but I'm pretty much the same system if I'm in the Bahamas or surf fishing in California. they're still pretty much the same kind of thing. Doesn't matter where you're fishing, but there are subtle differences, and those differences are going to determine the difference between success and failure sometimes. So the biggest thing I can possibly advise everybody that's going to go wading some flats is find out as much about that flat as you can beforehand from experts who know your area.